Car, thank you so much for being here with us today.
I am glad to be here with you.
And the us meaning me, and then the folks who are watching this video who are probably clicked play because they're super curious about what this anti-boring toolkit looks like in the world of a classroom teacher as well as a one-to-one coach. And you straddle both of those roles, don't you?
I do.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about each of them just so we kind of know who you are as an educator.
Initially, I got involved in the anti-boring approach as a coach because one of my students' families linked me up with one of your coaches, and we were working together with that student. But then it was really clear to me that it applied to the way that I taught and the way that all of my kids in my classes learn as well. I currently teach from grade 3 to grade 8. I've taught all the way up to grade 12 and as young as kindergarten. And I think the most interesting thing is that I have a different idea of how kids learn. And you'd
different compared to the dominant
before.
Before
that different
course, you mean?
Yeah, different from before taking the course. Like, I mean, they teach you some psych stuff or whatever when you go to teachers college, and maybe things have changed a little bit because I've been doing this for over 20 years now. But I never really understood some of the brain stuff, and I never really had it all kind of mapped out and networked in a way that wasn't boring for the kids, or for me. So yeah, it was initially for this particular student who had some executive function challenges. But it really helped a lot of my students and myself in a lot of different ways.
Let's actually talk a bit. I mean, we'll talk specifics in a moment, but I'm curious what anti-boring means to you. And you don't have to define it the way you think I mean it, but because you just used it, boring to the kids and boring to yourself, like what does it mean now to be an anti-boring teacher to you?
I think a lot of it is about choice. I think a lot of it is about authenticity. I think a lot of it is about like stimulating the different senses and ways of learning and ways of processing, and sort of connecting them one with the other in ways that maybe you didn't before. And that goes for teaching too. Being okay doing things in a way that you haven't done them before. And that, like, there's this feeling of ownership about it that for me, as a teacher, makes it less boring as the people I coach, because it has grown from that one student. You can see that they're more engaged the more we work with things. And in the classroom, it's slower for them to get on board because they're used to a sort of prescribed way of a classroom being. But once they're on board, it's really cool to see them engaged and in control of how they want to proceed a lot of the time.
Well, let's talk specifically what that looks like then, because I can imagine a number of teachers hearing you. And yes, we talk about differentiated learning, and there are buzzwords like that in the culture, but I think also as a former classroom teacher, it sounds overwhelming to put ownership in the hands of the students. So I'm really curious to hear maybe a couple of examples of what it used to look like before you learned the anti-boring tools, and what it looks like now with the ownership more strongly placed in the students' hands.
So from my perspective, I've always been kind of an eclectic teacher. I've tried a lot of different things, but I've always felt like I had to perfect it before I tried it in the classroom. And I had some very distinct outcomes in mind that would like indicate success to me. And one of the big things that I've learned, especially through the club, when we kind of do the retrieval and we kind of try to teach stuff, even if we haven't thought about it for a while, and what I've embraced in my personal life and in my professional life is that kind of imperfect action, that idea of just doing it, even if it's not going to be perfect. So what that has allowed me to do is try things in the classroom that I maybe wouldn't have tried because I felt unsure about like my level of perfection with it or expertise with it or what it would look like. So that's like the first big impact, is that it's like sort of empowered me to try different things. I started this school year with like some very specific goals about how I wanted to implement the toolkits in the classroom. And I started with some of the study cycles, some of how the brain works, some of the really nice mini lessons that just get the kids understanding how their brains actually learn. And right from the get-go, there was a lot of buy-in. And there's a lot of times where the kids are using the language back towards me.
Wow.
The other thing is that I think that my students, I've always seen it as a partnership, but I think that I'm more authentically, truly invested in their role in the partnership as an active part of what's going on. So yeah, I feel a lot more comfortable. I feel a lot more comfortable letting them own what's happening, even if it doesn't look like what it might look like if I ran it.
That is so interesting, and I think worth dwelling on, because it's so adultist of us,
Mm.
to say things like we're good liberal progressive educators, and that we've learned like, yes, it's a partnership between the student and the teacher and blah 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 blah. But what does it look like to thoroughly embody that partnership? And I wonder if there's a way, if you could describe how how that partnership was for you before you got more comfortable authentically letting the students do things that might even look different than you had anticipated.
It's definitely been a very long sort of journey to that. But I think one of the critical things that has happened recently this year, well, in the last maybe 2 to 3 years, is this idea that I don't have to actually secretly behind the scenes choreograph things in a way that I control them so that the other person or the kids think that they're controlling it. Like, you know, that what was that thing that was in that Greek movie where it's like, oh, the father is the head of the family, but the mother is the neck and turns it to look, you know, that sort of like subtle manipulation that makes a person hopefully feel empowered, but there's like the undercurrent of I'm still in control.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that has allowed me to kind of let go of that a little bit is this trust that if they're invested in their process, it's going to go better for them. And if it goes slower at the beginning, that's fine, because the experience is going to make them be able to like choose a pace or experience a pace that's appropriate for them later. If it's frustrating in the beginning, that's okay, because they've also now seen me kind of maybe be frustrated not remembering something that I wanted to say or try. I think it's really about trusting them more, because I understand more of what's going on.
Right. So there are a few things there. There's understanding, and I think you're referring to executive function kinds of challenges that students might be having, whereas before it's like, why can't they do X, Y, and Z? I gave it in the instructions. Why aren't they doing it? And now you have a lot more understanding because of our EF deep dive videos inside the club, what literally is keeping the student from being able to enact the thing?
Yeah, I never really understood the degree to which we all are neurodivergent. Like we all have these idiosyncrasies and particularities in the way that we think, the way that we process, the way that we remember, the way that we analyze, the way that we connect things, the way that we communicate. We have all of that. And I never really, there are certain behaviors, both in class and in students who I worked with independently. There are certain behaviors or inabilities to move forward that I used to get a lot more frustrated with, and I used to not understand. Like I genuinely didn't understand it. And now it's not that I am like a neuroscience nerd or anything. It's just that I get it more, that these are things for which there are strategies, there are supports. One can be patient, one can try different things. And like, again, fundamentally understand that the brain is making its own path, sort of.
I love hearing how powerful that is to you. It's almost like just being reminded of the neuroplasticity of the brain, like it's always growing. I don't have something more wise to say about that.
Well, it's interesting because I talk to the kids about that a lot more frequently because I'm doing like the monthly coaching calls, because I'm working as intensely with the couple of students that I coach separately. It feels like it's not just like a PD that I did and then I took like one or two things and I forgot the rest. It's very quickly and actively became part of how I am. And the idea that they can create their brain, that I can create my brain, that our brains can be molded and created, and how to do it, and how hard it is and how long it might take, but that it's possible and even probable if you continue at it.
And continue at it with very specific kinds of behaviors at very specific kinds of intervals that you can actually control.
Exactly. Like actual techniques, actual things to do.
Yeah. So what you just said about the community calls is really helpful for me because I have an ongoing insecurity around the fact that I have created the Rock Your Coaching program to be an entire year. Now, it is possible for people to take Art of Inspiring Students, the main toolkit course by itself, without being in the community. But I had a strategy consultant work with me for a while, and she just said, Gretchen, how do people learn everything? Like, what's the most effective amount of time and learning process for these tools? And I just said, when people stay with me for a year, if they learn the toolkit and then get a year's worth of reflection and support and just reminders, it's like spaced retrieval. That's when I see the biggest changes happen. And she said, great, then just organize your program that way and trust that people who really want to learn the tools deeply and really see an impact inside their practice with students will choose to do the year and let it go from there. And so I'm hearing from you that in your experience, this time that you've spent with us really is what has made this training especially effective for you.
Yeah, that it's absolutely true. The other thing is that I did it at the beginning of the summer months, and it was through at a time of virtual learning. And I was very lucky and supported by the family of one of my students and that other coach. So they actually booked time for me to meet with one of the coaches, so that as I was working my way through the course, I was able to like process it with someone or discuss it with someone or ask my questions and stuff like that. Um, and it was really interesting because I thought, oh, this is just so spectacular and special. And it was. But then starting, I guess, in September, I joined the club part, and I realized that that whole sort of support thing is there the whole time, but because of when I started it, it wasn't there at the beginning. And so that was really super lucky and lovely. And I would say anybody who is doing it needs to be part of the club and needs to, even though it's at the end of the day, in the middle of the week, just like pour that glass of wine and show up.
Yeah, and actually at the time that you took Art of Inspiring Students, I hadn't been advertising the full year of Rock Your Coaching yet. So that's why you didn't even know to join, is because I wasn't advertising it. And my consultant said, Gretchen, you've got to tell people
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
available. And so now I've restructured the website to focus on Rock Your Coaching if people are educators and just want to learn the toolbox, and then Rock Your Biz if people want to learn the business side too. So
And I have to say too, uh-oh, now I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, I got distracted listening. But that's good. That's communication. That's proper communication.
It happens when two engaged people are talking. I was talking about that's how I organized, well, Rock Your Coaching and Rock Your Biz.
I remembered. Mm-hmm. Okay, so even when I joined with the club, it took me a while to also know that there were so many online resources. That there were online resources that I could access in between the months, the meetings and stuff. And so that was really good and really important to know, because that's made a change too. And you rewatching the things that I couldn't make it to.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite of the type of, because I post student sessions, which you've had some access to. I didn't use, when you first started, I don't think I had allowed those to the Rock Your Coaching people, but now I do. And then there's the executive function deep dive videos, and then some surprise goodies. Are there certain kinds that certain ones that you always look for to want to watch?
For me, it's definitely the deep dives.
Okay, good.
Yeah, definitely the deep dives.
That makes me so happy because our fellow coach and anti-boring educator, Krista Hott, creates those videos. And so it's really exciting for me, the more people come into the club, to be able to show off their expertise. And Krista really knows her stuff around executive function. So I'm so glad that you're taking those in.
In fact, I have registered for her course.
Oh, good.
As well. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, because it's really helpful too.
Yeah. And just so for people to know, when you're ready to learn more about executive function, and if you decide you want to take Krista's course, which is incredible and extensive, there is a discount inside the club to be able to take it. So let's pop back to your statements around letting the students own it, even if it doesn't look like what you had hoped. And I think it might be helpful for some classroom-based educators out there to hear maybe an example, so they can imagine into, like, what was a lesson you taught, and where did you allow ownership, and how did it look different than you had expected, and what made you okay with that, rather than grade it poorly, or, however grades work for you, I don't know.
Okay, really simple example. I was teaching a grade 4 French class, and I was giving like a free choice practice time where you could do a variety of different things. And so I gave a list of some things, and they could try other things as well. And part of it was like writing out vocabulary over and over again on a whiteboard, because somehow whiteboards make it fun. And there was a student who came up to show me their whiteboard, and instead of writing the words out or working with the vocabulary specifically, they were drawing these interesting, odd characters that somehow to them represented the word. And I think in the past, I probably would have been more adamant that they need to practice the spelling. They need to practice, the part of speech. They need to practice the sentence. They need to figure out, like, they need to practice the translation or whatever it was. It didn't look like what I thought it was going to look like. But what I understood was that they were using their senses in a different way that worked for them. And they felt free to do it, which I think is also really important. Another example would be that I feel a lot more comfortable asking them what they want to do. So I always have lots of stuff in my back pocket, but a lot of the time I will say, okay, we need to really practice this way of communicating. Or I also teach art, and I'll say, okay, well, we really need to get to know this skill or this artist. How do you guys want to do that? And do you want to do it in groups? Do you want to do it independently? Do you want to do it with me? And I just have a lot more choice in there. In the end, there have been results that would indicate less than stellar productivity. And in the past, I may have chastised that or been displeased or whatever. And I think as long as there's some effort in there, I know that I've said to some students who I've had over the course of like 4 or 5 years, and just sort of changed my approach and said, okay, good, that made sense to you. Now it's important that you keep practicing, right? And then because I haven't shut down the way they want to process the information, they're more likely to continue processing it. So even if they're not at par with where I think they should be after 20 minutes or 40 minutes or even a week of working on something, even if they're not where I think they should be, as long as they're fully engaged, they actually are where they should be. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm imagining that likely that student, if they had tried to follow your instructions exactly and do what exactly you thought, they still wouldn't be, they would actually be further behind.
Oh yeah, no.
Than where they are now as an engaged student, even if it's
absolutely
imperfect.
Absolutely. Students who have challenges getting work done or are, I don't know how to say it, but are unable to work independently. Those students are really benefited by all of that choice and all of that trust. Students who are at the higher end of the achievement scale are also benefited because they can run with it. And students who are falling in between there can really find their place and move at their pace. It's probably the best way of differentiating that I've ever come across.
It's so fascinating to me because I don't know that the Art of Inspiring Students course teaches differentiation so directly, and yet that is your biggest outcome from it. And I'm curious about that. Like where?
It comes from understanding. It comes from having tangible skills to offer them, understanding how they're learning and how they can better learn, and trusting that they can own this. And again, the trusting that they can own this comes from trusting that I can do things imperfectly. So it all kind of, yeah, it's all one big mush.
It is a big mush, that your permission to be imperfect in the classroom and even to model how you recover from having made a mistake or shared something less than perfect or whatever, that modeling helps the students have more permission also to play and experiment and then to recover if they need to. And you all get to play with true ownership and partnership rather than that pretend one that you were talking about before.
It's also a lot more relaxing and rewarding because I'm not forcing things or striving for more all the time. I'm very present with what's going on
Yeah.
for me, for them, for us as a group.
Yeah. So I'm curious about the kiddo who brought you the pictures, and remind me what grade or what age that student was in your French class.
He was in grade 4, so
Okay,
I guess 8 or 9.
8 or 9 years old. Okay. So I am curious, when he showed you the pictures, is he somebody who also knows the study cycle?
Yes, not the full study cycle in huge detail, but definitely he knows. We've talked about how we have like the encoding and the retrieval and the re-encoding. And so yeah, I guess maybe he does know the whole sort of study cycle. Yeah, because we've talked about that.
Of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I go over, even at that grade level, is like how our brains work with the neurotransmitters and the synapses and, you know, searching for treasure in the jungle and building that bridge and all of that really good stuff, which is so exciting to them. And like right down to grade 3, I talk about that.
I love that. And so for people who don't know what Carr is referring to, is modules 1 and 2 of the Art of Inspiring Students, which is all about the brain-based mini lectures. So I love hearing, because people often ask me, how young can kids go with this? And I've always said, well, yeah, you have to change your language a tiny bit for the younger people, but it sounds like you can pretty much lead the mini lectures as taught for even as young as 3rd grade.
Yeah, and they get it and they don't retain it, but that's okay, because now I will continue, like I continue to do it as a full lesson.
Right.
At the beginning of or I will at the beginning of every school year, and then I continue to use the language throughout.
Yeah. So that's where I'm curious, when he brought you those pictures, did you do any study cycle follow-up? And if not, and if you're curious, I could share some thoughts I have about some ways to follow up with the study cycle. Like, do you remember if you?
I didn't. I did a lot of, tell me about that. And how is this going to help you with what you need to know and what you plan to do going forward? And how did he answer
that question? How is this going to help you with what you need to know?
I honestly don't remember.
That's okay. I know.
And I have to say that this particular student is not extremely reflective or verbally reflective. Yeah. He probably said something like, well, I like it. Yeah. Or something like that, you know?
Yeah. Because what I'm curious, I'll make my suggestion, and then I would be really curious to hear from you how it lands, because I'm not in the classroom anymore using this stuff. And so I could make suggestions that may not be realistic at all. But I'm curious if there might have been an opportunity to say to him, after understanding it more and affirming the creativity of it, where were you on the study cycle when you were doing that? And the answer might be encoding in a new way. And then, so what's the next part of the study cycle? Testing yourself to see what you know and don't know. Have you done that yet? Or how could you do that to make sure that this encoding strategy did work for you? Like, I hear that you really liked doing it. Now let's see what worked and what you still have to work on.
Yeah, that would have been really good. I will do that next time.
And is that kind of conversation you feel like you have time for?
Absolutely. And I think that that's a question I probably should be asking more frequent. Well, I'd like to be asking more frequently than I do. Oh, where are you in the study cycle for that?
Yeah.
I think that that's a really good way to maybe even get that self-reflection that might not come as naturally.
Yeah. Also, because, and I'm kind of making this up as we're talking, you can ask study cycle based questions that are yes or no. And those are that have yes or no answers. And those are sometimes easier for the students who are younger and or not as self-reflective. So doing closed-ended for quite a while before you get to the open-ended.
Yeah.
So yeah, because that's what's intriguing to me. I love the sense of ownership and experimentation. And then there is a question, once we open kids up to feeling more free to be able to do that, how do we help them also remain rigorous around actually ensuring that they're learning and what might be possible? I mean, I'll be curious next school year if you're able to stay with us in the club, and even if you're not, for you to check in with me. I'll be curious to hear if once you're able to even tweak this questioning with more refinement, whether you notice that their output does become more and more what you had been hoping.
It already has.
Uh-huh.
I mean, this line of questioning will certainly help and definitely will be good. But I guess in the long run, I've seen that when they have that ownership, it's better.
Yeah, it just gets better naturally.
Yeah, it gets better naturally.
Yeah, I love that point. I feel like you're teaching me something here that I would like to articulate more for the families that I work with, and even for my my brother and his wife, related to their relationship with my nephew. But I know it can be panic inducing at the beginning to trust the process, especially when it's not as fast as you want. But you have the luxury also of being with kids over several years, and so you can watch that growth happen too.
Well, this is and again, it comes back to this trying something that I'm not perfect at yet and letting the outcome be what it is and like developing from it. I've started this new guided group thing that I've been wanting to do for years, and I've just never felt confident enough to try it. And what it does is it gives the kids the ability to work independently in a group or with me in this like sort of rotation way. And so I have so much more one-on-one time with each kid. I have so much more time to like engage in those conversations because I'm doing so much less full class instruction. And I'm not doing, I'm not prepping 12 different lessons, right? The way that, the big fear is when you're trying to differentiate, when you're trying to meet each person's needs.
Yes, I love that you mentioned that, because a fear that I had as I was going through my master's in education and learning all the great teaching and getting my teaching license and learning all the great progressive teaching methods is I just noticed more and more, I was like, wow, the intellectual load for thinking about learning is completely in the teacher's hands. And it's heavier and heavier, especially the more preps you have. And there's so much the teacher has to think about and guide you through your learning in all these ways. And I suspected that there was a way for teachers and students to share that intellectual load. But it does require that students need to be taught how learning works so that they can share that load. And teachers actually could stand to actually learn how the brain works.
How the brain works. Yeah, that was a huge thing for me.
Yeah.
But again, it's that buy-in part. It's that anti-boring buy-in part where like you could teach them how the brain works, but if you don't give them like your trust and your patience and if you don't give them the ability to take the reins and see where it goes, then they're not going to own it, and then they're not going to be engaged, and then all of the lovely things are not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Because as much as it can go as slowly or whatever, there are still targets they need to hit. There are still things they need to know. It's not I don't know. I was going to say dancing math formulas, but I have done that before. So like, I don't know what to say, but it's very tangibly, it's tangible, and it's very, like, it's geared to being able to develop that rigorousness that you're talking about, right? In the classroom, and especially with the coaching and the one-on-one.
Yeah. There's something really important here that we're talking about that I want to think more around that rigor requires engagement first and ownership skills first. And then potentially it can deepen and wisen itself. But it's just a faster process than trying to have people be rigorous first and get engaged through the rigor.
Absolutely. And then the idea is that there's this like spiral between like confidence and effort and motivation and success that just keeps feeding itself.
Yeah.
And a lot of time the spiral goes downwards. What you did didn't work. You're never going to be good enough. You're not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to bother trying. And it just shifts the whole thing for most kids, yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's good.
Well, as we wrap up, is there anything like if there is an educator out there who's considering joining us for a year of Rock Your Coaching, either now or in the future, though I'll say now, the now being May 2022, I've added the month of June, I've added 6 additional hours of calls so that people can have the equivalent of what you talked about you had with the other coach. So now's a great time because of that. But are there any tips or is there any advice you'd give them for how to make the most of their experience with the tools or learning the tools and or also inside the club and the community calls? Bless you.
Excuse me. I would say don't wait for the perfect moment. Do not be worried about having enough time. Because there's so many little gems that it's just gonna build. And for me, the whole thing was really very pleasurable and intuitive and lovely. It wasn't like this dry, boring way to do things for me for learning it. So I would just say go for it, I guess. And I would say also definitely go to the club meetings. And if you can make connections with other people in there and, you know, talk about stuff or share stuff or whatever. I know that a lot of educators especially are exhausted right now. And fairly so. You know, it's been an exhausting few years on a multitude of levels. But it's kind of like when you go to the gym, you know, you don't want to go, but you never regret having gone.
Yeah.
You know, it's worth it. And you feel good afterwards. I feel invigorated when I talk about this stuff, whether it's with the kids, whether it's with you, whether it's with the other coaches, whether it's with my husband, whether it's with my friends who have adult ADHD and, you know, are looking for some things that they could maybe integrate into their work life. I forget what the question was,
yeah,
but
that's
just
great. It was tips, and you just dive in, try, show up to the club. Don't expect things to be perfect.
Yeah.
And
get a separate notebook. Get a separate notebook that is just for this and like write stuff down. Write it down. If it makes no sense at all, write it down in like pretty colors, write it down in drawings, just like as you're going through it, like write stuff down so that you don't forget. Not that you're gonna not remember, but like being able to go back and kind of flip through it. And I've done years and years and years worth of PD. And I think this is the one that I probably have gone back to the most within the first like year of having learned it, because it's useful.
That's huge to hear. My mother was a classroom teacher and she would always bemoan these amazing courses she took over the summer, and then how little she would actually have the time, space, and energy to implement during the school year. And it's one reason why I made this a year, thinking about my mother, because if she had a community to touch into, it would remind her, she wouldn't have to even go back to the materials, though I'm delighted you flipped through them, but just showing up to the calls and or even watching the video of the calls reminds you of something and gives you an idea of something to try with the students. And then over time, just like with your own students, over time, you get better and better at teaching in this new anti-boring way.
And more accepting of not doing it perfectly.
Yes, yes. So another tip I would give people based on something that delights me about you, Car, and the way you show up to the meetings when you can. Well, you often will let me know if you can't come, and that's just lovely to know that. Then that way I'm thinking about you during the call because I've just gotten your email. But you give yourself permission, it seems to me, to show up exactly as you are.
Yes.
With whatever grumps are going on. And especially at the end of a long day of teaching, there are grumps, and you let yourself bring that energy to the call. And to me, that is, it's energizing and engaging and real. And I think we all learn this stuff better when we're real with each other. So thank you for your willingness around bringing your full self.
Aw, thank you. That's wonderful. Yeah. You make it easy. I wish we were like in the same city and could be friends.
I know, I feel that way with everybody. Though that said, I have this sabbatical I keep talking about, the school year of 2023, 2024. And one of my visions for that year is that I find a way to borrow or cheaply rent a camper van. And I drive across the United States and Canada, anywhere that's drivable. Mexico's fine too, though I'm not training anyone in Mexico right now, and meet in person some of the people I've trained, and maybe even get to witness in action the tools in the classroom and document that so the world can see it in more four-dimensionality. So we would get to meet each other and have a nice long hug.
That would be lovely. That would be lovely. Yeah, good.
Yes. And if you have a place where you live where I could park my camper van, I'd bring my own bed with me. But
I have 5 acres of land.
Ah, there we go.
So you are welcome to camp out in my back 40 for as long as you would like, and come to school with me and be my like guest in my classes.
I love it.
As often as you would like to.
Oh, good. Wow. It's a plan then. I have to look up, where exactly are you? How long it would take to drive there from California?
From California, I have no idea. I'm going to say 12 hours because that's probably, I guess that has no basis in reality.
We'll look
I don't know.
We'll see. We'll see. Wow. I'm so glad you took some time. If folks are listening to this and have questions based on anything Car said, feel free to email them to me at Gretchen@GretchenWegner.com, and I'll tackle whatever I can. And are you open to me forwarding any of the questions? Because there might be some teachers out there who are like, wait, I got to know more about that.
Of course. And if it's helpful, I'm teaching in Ontario. Mm-hmm. Just in terms of like how things fit into the curriculum. And I've gone K to 12, art, math, French.
That's a good
social studies.
Man. Everything basically.
Not science.
Yes, that's
not
true.
Science.
That's true.
Yeah. And not language arts.
Yeah. Well, thank you for just continuing to bring your full self. And I hope when the year's done, you might decide to continue on with us. We'll see. Oh, yeah. But regardless, stay in touch and have a good summer too.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Take care.